Hi, we're going to give everybody a few minutes to jump on and then we'll get started. We've got some viewers. I'll pull this up so we can see comments here. Hi, I'm Amber Wakefield. I'm here with Chief McFarland of the Effingham Police Department. We're at the Effingham Chamber of Commerce today. We come to you to talk a little bit about human trafficking, answer some of your questions, and really get to understand how we can be better community members, how we can be more aware as advocates and activists. Just wanted to take about 30 minutes and lay a few questions out for you. Is that all right?
Sounds great.
Great. January 11th was Human Trafficking Awareness Day, and January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month, which is why we're coming to you with these interviews in January, just to kind of focus our community on what we can do as community members to combat human trafficking. Tell me a little bit about yourself and the police department and your role in human trafficking.
Well, I am currently the Chief of Police. I've been an officer with the Effingham Police Department for over 21 years. I'm a lifelong resident of this area. So this is the area I grew up in. This is a community I know quite well. And the actual, I guess, issue of human trafficking has been around since 1865, I believe, whenever the 13th Amendment was brought in that abolished slavery. And we've been dealing with it since then. However, as a law enforcement side, we never addressed it as human trafficking. It was always other crimes that known to us. And it wasn't until 2000 that the federal legislation enacted a law called the Human Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which actually made it a crime for human trafficking. And that law also provided services for victims. So it gave us an opportunity when we did find a victim to actually get them into the protection they need to get them out of that environment. So even though that was 2000, it was an idea that never really got much attention until the last several years. So during that time, we became to acknowledge, we had to learn, first of all, what is human trafficking? That's the first thing. And one of the things that we do as humans is whenever I give you a term such as human trafficking, in your mind you draw a picture.
Absolutely.
And it's a bad picture. But unless you know what the facts are and what's occurring, the chances of you having an accurate picture in your head are pretty slight. So what we need to do as a police department is keep our community informed and educated on what the issue is. So when we look at human trafficking, it is to use another person or services through either force, fraud, or coercion, and in any legal manner. So it's one of the issues we come across is we have migrant workers who may or may not be documented, and a community will say, well, they're all kinds of trafficking victims. They're here voluntarily.
And you're unpacking, a good question is, there are two divisions of human trafficking. There's labor trafficking and then there's sex trafficking.
Correct.
So when we talk about human trafficking in the labor sect of that, explain that a little bit more of what you see or what you don't see.
What we don't is more importantly. Yeah. Looking back at some of just the data available, and I believe it was 2017, Illinois had about 300 cases of human trafficking. Out of those, about 250 were sex crimes. So out of the 300 we had that year, only 50 were actual for labor, and we just don't see it locally. Where you may see that is some foreign citizens are smuggled into the country, and then they have to do repay a debt for being smuggled in, or they're brought to work in some factories or in farms, but they're held against their will. They don't want to be there.
Sure.
Anybody that comes to the country on their own or with the intent or consent is smuggled, possibly.
Sure.
So they're both issues, they're just not the same.
And we'll be sharing some more on the page about the differences in smuggling and trafficking, because there are lots of differences. And that's not necessarily our focus tonight because we don't see so much of that here.
Correct.
What we do see is the other side of human trafficking, the sex trafficking. Tell me a little bit about what you guys at the police department, your training daily, or how you get your training, and where that takes you from there, how you combat that.
Well, after identifying actually what human trafficking is and what role law enforcement has contact in, we identified several areas which we would most likely come in contact with victims of human trafficking. And there's about 4 common scenarios in which we might. So knowing that, we provide specific instructions and training to officers that if you encounter somebody in this situation, here are the following clues you need to look for to see if this is more than just a disturbance call, or if this is more than just check the welfare of a minor, or if this is more than a hospital reporting a possibly abused child, and just to be aware of what the bigger picture could be.
Because it is a multifold problem. You know, they're involved in sex trafficking is usually domestic violence, or you'll find child abuse, or you know, neglect a lot of times. And so that leads you to determine, you know, what this might be.
Correct, and it's a very complex issue too. And there's, I guess we could touch upon, there's several, I believe, misconceptions or myths the public may have about victims of human trafficking. And those involve, you know, well, that person was involved in illegal activity. They knew what they were getting into. You know, they had ample opportunity to call the police. You know, and that's not the case, because the bond between the victim and the trafficker is often very tight. And this isn't something that happens overnight. They just don't grab somebody and toss them into this. This is a slow process in which they're drawn in, and that trafficker fills many needs that victim needs or requires. He's meeting those needs. So whenever they come in contact with law enforcement, they can be protective of that trafficker, because it's a bad situation, but psychologically they're not at a point to break that contact.
That kind of dispels a lot of the online myths that you hear of, you know, I'm in a department store and I'm being followed and someone's going to, that's not the truth of how this presents itself, essentially.
No, and I understand people are very well-meaning. And once again, when I say people have this image in their head, what is human trafficking? It's what they saw on social media, and they're like, well, there was a balloon on my car, or a balloon on my mailbox, or a zip tie on my car, and that when you do this, they're going to abduct you. Well, think about it, I guess from a police side, if you could. Use our police hat for a second. Stranger abductions are incredibly rare. And when somebody is abducted, their face is plastered everywhere on the news and media. A trafficker is in it for money. He doesn't want to get arrested. Some of the training I've had estimates that a trafficker can earn as much as $100,000 a year per victim. So that's their motivation, is financial. And they are not going to engage in behavior which would unduly risk them to being arrested. So I'm not going to say stranger abductions don't occur, because they do. They're, however, really quite rare, and 9 times out of 10, it's usually something has already happened and the family is unfortunately involved.
Yeah. Let's talk about the victims for a second. Tell me what you see as somebody being a potential victim. Who are the potential victims? That's
what we're worried about in Effingham, is the victims have risk factors that will, I guess, determine on whether or not they might likely become a victim of human trafficking. And what we found are substance abuse issues, either by the victim or the victim's parents or caregivers, truancy, runaways, history of sexual abuse of the victim, foster care system involvement, and it's the children that are in that system that get involved in the foster care that lose connection to the family, that if they disappear or run away on their own and then inadvertently become a victim, that they don't have their face plastered everywhere like that alleged stranger abduction would. And that's what the traffickers are after, are those that, I hate to use the term throwaway, but it's those that aren't going to generate that kind of media interest if they disappear.
Yeah. That was something that we spoke about on the phone that I was really unaware of, was just the involvement of foster children being so at risk. Teens, can you give me a little bit about the technology age we live in and how that presents itself, maybe how you guys monitor it, how it's being monitored and how it's being used?
Technology, it's a great thing, but it also brings a lot of peril with it too. And it makes the world a small place. I can have contact with police officers throughout the United States, throughout the world, on this. But unfortunately, it also allows us to bring criminals from across the borders into your own home. And looking at some of the statistics, 3 out of 4 victims say they were advertised online for sex. That's how the trafficker found clients or found people to come in and participate. So what we utilize is a web-based provider that is also utilized by about 1,500 other law enforcement agencies in the United States. Now, there's about 100,000 ads, new ads placed every day on the internet.
Wow.
I've got 27 officers sworn. I can't go through 100,000 ads a day.
Right.
What this service does, though, is it allows us to identify a geographical area where these ads are placed, and it also tracks where else this person was actually advertised at. So you may see an ad that says this area of the state, but they may have also been placed in 13 other states. So the chances of that victim being there in our community are pretty slim. But if you see an ad where they're starting on the East Coast, they're there for a week, and then getting closer and closer, and then suddenly they're advertising there in Champaign, that's the one we're going to look at. And that's the one, then we'll see what else information's available, and there is a wealth of information on this. And this service claims they've been around for about 5 years, and they said in those 5 years they've identified 10,000 children, they've identified 15,000 traffickers, and 35,000 victims.
Wow.
And what it does allow us to do as law enforcement is to coordinate, because I may have a small piece of the puzzle here in Effingham, however there may be 10 other agencies that also have pieces. And then it allows us to coordinate, determine what the investigative is, the scope of it is, and then with the federal law, it gives us a vehicle in which they can be held accountable for multiple jurisdictions.
Sure. That's incredible. They go off of keywords, they go off of, you can't remember, you tell me about what they go off of, right?
There are certain things that, yes, that would indicate that someone may be under the control of another. And those are the ones we key in on, because they're the ones, and I look at this from a legal perspective, that will fit that definition of force, fraud, or coercion.
Sure.
That were needed for successful prosecution.
Sure. And we talk about that in 2000 and how it's grown, the Human Trafficking Victims Protection Act. It allows you to prosecute traffickers. Does it have a, what criminals get? Am I under the understanding that there's a maximum sentence, and that's what they pretty much push through every time? They
have sentencing guidelines, and federal prosecutors and judges have discretion on some of the stuff, but I do know of some cases where, and this is where the federal law comes in, and so it's more important, is it's just not this area problem. They move those victims to areas where there's a bigger population and a bigger potential list of those that would serve or solicit the service.
Sure.
And we really don't have the size of Effingham to support that.
Sure.
So
we talk about, go ahead.
So on the federal side, if you traffic a minor across state lines for purposes of this, they light people up, and I've seen life in prison. So,
fantastic.
Yeah, so it does have very severe penalties on the federal level, and the state level sometimes lacks that same ability to hold the offender accountable.
Yeah. There are a lot of states, neighboring Kentucky just passed a new state legislation mandating signs with the human trafficking hotline. That's something that we've discussed.
Correct.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about what you would like to see. And are you working with somebody in the state of Illinois to pass laws like that, where we can require the human trafficking hotline number be in public spaces?
Yeah, there are some laws that have already passed, such as the hotel industry and hospitality industry is required to have human trafficking training. Now, generally, I'm sure the corporation puts that on, however, that's something we could do. And I'm working locally with a group, and we're trying to get similar posters and signage in our local truck stops and businesses that serve the transient community, because the chances of us actually identifying, and this goes back into the mental pictures, what do you have in human trafficking? I have this image and I see that. No.
Right.
It's once that victim is separated and they see that number, that might put something in their head. If they're close to that point where they might want to call and get help, that might be the deciding factor.
It's there.
And that's the whole purpose, is to try to give victims every opportunity to reach out for help and provide the help once they need it.
Definitely. let's talk a little bit about, since we talk about our idea of human trafficking and what we've talked about here isn't always what we see here. What do we see here? The kind of human trafficking or sex trafficking that you encounter in a local area, or what to look for? What are the signs?
Our biggest concern is the potential victims from this area. So we ask people that, you have to identify the risk factors of the people that are at risk of this. And what we would look for, I guess, would be, it may be your niece, it may be your friend, it may be your daughter's friend, or somebody that has those issues at home, that maybe the parents suffer from drug addiction issues, or that minor is in and out of school and has substance abuse issues, suddenly starts talking about a new boyfriend they've met online, or suddenly starts having gifts they can't afford. That's the stuff that we need to look at, and if we could stop that person becoming a victim, that is the best case scenario for us, because once they get into that circle, it's really hard to get them out.
As a community member, it comes down to, or as a parent, it comes down to see something, say something.
Absolutely. And I would like to kind of elaborate on that if I can, because
Please.
We do get phone calls from people, and they'll say, I noticed this suspicious behavior at this house or this location, this neighborhood, and then the police don't get back in touch with them. And it can be an easy perception the police blew me off.
Right.
You have to realize, though, that if you call and say there's frequent traffic in and out of my neighbor's house, they could likely be involved in narcotics trafficking. Mm-hmm. Narcotics investigation take months to develop an actual case that's suitable for prosecution. So you may have called in and maybe something we're already investigating, but we can't talk about it. We can't discuss it. And also understand, if you call and report something, we don't knock on that person's door and say, hey, so-and-so just said you're up to no good, what are you doing? We actually have investigative techniques we can do to determine if this is something that needs, closer attention or not. And if we find it's something innocuous and innocent, we'll tell the person who called, hey, we looked into it, there's nothing there. But just understand, I can't call the people back and say, we looked into it, boy, are you right. Man, we can't do that. So it's not that we don't care, it's just that we always can't share information.
Sure, that's understandable. I think one of the questions that I'd like to know more about is, how, as a community member, how can I get a little bit more involved? Or who would you like to see in the community get more involved? I know we've talked about Truckers Against Trafficking, and we're a 5770 crossroads here where we go coast to coast and border to border, essentially.
Yeah, one of the things that really makes Effingham thrive is our transient community. I may be wrong with this number, but I believe it's about 90,000 a day come through town.
Wow.
So, Effingham is really, it's like almost two communities. On the north end, we see stuff that you don't see on the south end. So each organization itself in Effingham plays a unique role, and how we would have them help with the issue is kind of dependent on that. So if we have people employed at truck stops, restaurants that have frequent contact with the transient population, they may have more signs that we'd say, look for this. Mm-hmm. Our local population, however, just going to a retail store or somewhere in town would really, I would think it'd almost be extremely difficult to pick out victims of human trafficking.
Sure.
So the local individuals, what we'd like in the community is to become just informed on what it is and what it looks like, and who can be the biggest victim, who's most likely to become a victim of this. Because the chances of somebody setting up long-term, operations in our local hotels is pretty slim, because we have such a great community. The community doesn't put up with stuff. And if we get suspicious activity in any hotel, we get called immediately.
Sure.
So they don't have they're not as anonymous as they can be in a larger community, to where, you get a community of 100,000, that's extremely different than the community of Effingham. So it would be different for them as opposed to us.
Sure. As a parent and as a community member, I'm a parent of a teen. I think about, as I see my daughter with a lot of her friends and stuff, I think one of the things that I've learned through this training is to identify maybe her at-risk friends. Mm-hmm. And being able to have this conversation openly with my kid. Correct. And say, this is a real issue, this is what we see, and maybe, if you hear your friends talking about something,
Absolutely, because that's the ones that are actually going to have the inside knowledge of what's going on in their friend's life. And if they have a friend that has any of the at-risk factors, that's where we need to pay special attention. So if somebody, a child's friend is dealing with some of those issues, let your child know this, to be a good friend, we need to know this. To be a good friend, you need to tell me this. To be a good friend, you have to protect your friend.
Yeah, yeah. But did we see that in our community not too long ago? Was that a friend who...
We did, and that wouldn't necessarily fall under human trafficking. It's still a horrible situation. It was just, would be a traveler wanting to come for an improper relationship.
Sure.
And that's a threat too to the community. I mean, that does occur. There are people that have bad intent that would misrepresent themselves online and then travel this community to engage in that.
Sure. And I think that that was a good example of see something, say something, where somebody actually said, something's not right here, and say something.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you guys do your end of it.
Yeah, and I will say that I have mad props to the sheriff's office. They're the ones that obtained that call. They had a phenomenal response. They did a great job investigating it. And that would be, I guess, a shining example of what the community and the police can do when they work together.
Yeah, I agree. It was nice to see that. I'm going to check our time and see what we've got. We want to take a few questions. We're about 10 minutes away from 7. We've been running a little bit here. I'm hoping that we've engaged quite a few people, and they may have some questions. Butterfly Dreams Alliance says it's required in Illinois that signs with hotline be posted in all public places, even at picnics and such, with sign at entry and exit points. She says it's difficult to keep up because a lot of people will tear them down. And I think that perhaps you just have that in concert calendars or things like that get torn down. Would it be beneficial to have people, as myself, community members, that could go check and make sure their bathrooms have signs up?
Yeah, one of the things that our police department is doing is we are preparing actual signage to put in businesses. And we will contact the business ourselves and request they put it up and provide them additional. But however, if somebody becomes aware of a business that doesn't, let us know, and we're more than happy to contact that business and offer more.
Wonderful.
We work in conjunction with the community. We don't force the community.
Sure. You brought something up that made me think. A few of us at SAFE, S-A-F-E, would like to get involved with your organization. Should they call you at the police department and figure out, I guess that leads into another question of what you want to offer the community as far as resources and training and...
Unfortunately, like everything else, this pandemic has tossed everything into a tailspin. Prior to the pandemic, and this is after becoming chief, I was approached with this, and I put together about a 15-minute presentation on what human trafficking is on an awareness level. What I hope to do is, when things become more accessible, is to make that available to various community organizations and churches and groups, so that the more people that are aware and actually have a firm knowledge of what we're dealing with, the better they're going to be able to help the police department.
Absolutely. You'd like to bring it into churches and organizations. Is it something that you could bring it into, say, the school or, city council board meetings? And it doesn't just necessarily have to be in Effingham. This is something we can take to, say, Jasper County or Richland County or something like that.
Right. What we're talking about here isn't unique just to Effingham, but it's a lot of rural communities that don't have the same problems that the larger ones do. Now, some of the, like the school, we would have a different targeted education just for them, because they deal with students on a different basis than the community does, or different than the parent does. Mm-hmm. So what they're looking for is going to be different than what the community is looking for. So it really boils down to what group is requesting information as to what information we be provided.
Wonderful. I will definitely put some information in the comments so that people can resource, how to contact somebody or where to go. There's a lot of local resources, and this talk is a series of 3. We'll be talking with Survivor next week, and a woman who is a co-founder of a not-for-profit the following week. The not-for-profit is a house that takes care of human trafficking survivors and gives them a place to stay away from their trafficker. It gives them resources and I don't use the word rehabilitation, but services it is a lot of rehabilitation.
It is. They suffer great emotional and psychological trauma going through that, and it requires a lot of services to actually overcome that. And if it's not addressed and given to the victim at that time, the chances of that victim actually recovering, I think, would be slim.
Sure. Anne asks, what can we do to better educate potential victims on what to look for in terms of traffickers' techniques and life as a victim?
What the trafficker will do is, like traditionally it's going to be online, is how they'll contact the victims. And they are going to provide a need that victim is requiring. So that you may have a victim or a potential victim is online just saying that I don't like my school, my parents, or whatever else, and that trafficker can make contact with them to whatever platform, and I understand, I'm there too. And it's not a sudden thing that occurs. This is a slow, gradual process that draws that bond between the victim and the trafficker. One of the instances I'm aware of in the state is 2 years ago I was in Springfield for a detail, and during which I found out that an Illinois state trooper conducted a traffic stop, which they do hundreds and thousands of times a day. And he made contact with the teenage girl passenger and the middle-aged lady driver. And he noticed something wasn't right, which is what cops do. And he did what really good cops do, which was separate them and try to find out what's going on. And then he found out the teenage girl met her boyfriend online. And this lady was giving her a ride to Florida to be with her boyfriend. And so they were able to get that victim out of there then. And then during the follow-up investigation, it turns out the suspect lady was driving a rental car. They contacted the rental company to obtain evidence, and the rental company knew her by her first name and said she's a regular customer. She runs here all the time. So that's the issue we're having, is that the victim believes they're going into a relationship. This is somebody that cares about me, somebody I want to be with. And then once they go with that person, it's gradual. It's just not suddenly, here you are, you're a victim. It's, if you love me, you'll do this for me.
Right.
And then after that first time, it's the second time, and third time. And then eventually, there just becomes a point where they're trapped.
We'll only do this for a certain amount of time to get by, and then you won't have to do it anymore.
Correct. And so, in several ways, it really closely resembles a domestic violence cycle and type of relationship. So, just to understand, that's how victims generally come into it, would be a good place to start talking to your children and having to keep an eye on peers.
Yeah. Let's see what we got. Butterfly Dreams Alliance has a safe program to help make them wiser and more capable of spotting dangerous interactions and reporting them, watching out for each other, like buddy skills learned long ago. It's so important to watch out for our neighbors and our community. And this is a valid point.
Oh, absolutely. And this is a community problem, and it takes the community to address it. This isn't something you can just toss to the police or toss to mental health or toss to the medical facility or say, here, take care of the problem. This is us taking care of the problem because it's an us problem.
Sure. We have a lot of really great resources in our community too, like SWAN and SAFE and things like that. Do we have any kind of plan of how we can organize everybody together in a sense of, does it already exist? Of
going back to the federal law, the one passed in 2000, that was also a vehicle for providing resources to victims. So I have a contact in the federal law enforcement side, and they would be the ones actually I work with to present this case and build this case, because they have contacts throughout the United States, and they have contact to all the resources in this region, and they, I'm sure, provide the funding. And so if I came in contact with a victim, I know I make one phone call, then that person has all the knowledge, and that's what they do, and then they would put that victim in a position where they can get help they need.
As far as you being trained and your team being trained, is this something that you see, say, other communities surrounding us? Do they have point people that deal with the human trafficking or that are going through training? Police departments, I speak of.
This is an important issue to law enforcement in such that the International Chiefs of Police Association, which I'm a member of, actually came out and produced, free to the membership, various videos and training materials on key points in how to train your police. So as this became more of an issue in the public light, the more resources became available where all law enforcement agencies can get the training they need to help combat the issue.
It's fantastic. It sounds like a lot came out of the Human Trafficking Victims Protection Act.
It did. It revolutionized how we look at the problem, because traditionally police would see crime A, B, C, and D and not add them all together to get to E.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Let's see who we have here. And Norma says you can call the chamber office and we'll get you linked in the chamber. It's in the comments, but it's 217-342-4147. I also wanted to share the hotline number. It's posted on the page, and it'll be posted in the comments here. And all around you can get online. It's 1-888-373-7888. And we try to get that number out in front of just people's faces anywhere. I like to talk about victims and survivors in the term of people who can change. Like it's not their fault. It's not, they've been brainwashed, and I think that language is important. Do you notice that as well?
It's very important when we have contact with potential victims that you be careful on how you talk to them and how you approach this. This is a very complex issue, and police officers try as hard as we might. We don't have the skills others do. So the best we can do is try to identify what they may be a victim of and then put them in touch with the resources they need.
Sure.
Police officers are really good at arresting and prosecuting. So leave that to us. We'll take care of that part. But as far as the welfare of the victim, there are people that are much better suited to do that than us.
Sure. We have we see a lot of social media posts about a strange person following us. That's been one of the biggest questions that people have posed to me today is, we do see a lot of, is that true? Some strange person's following me and they wanted to steal my kid, or children are put in dresser drawers and shipped somewhere, or,
I get it.
It dilutes the real problem.
It does, and that's one of the downfalls of our digital age, is misinformation gets spread just as quickly as accurate information.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think somebody's following you, let us know. And sometimes it just could be, and we've had reports of this, so-and-so's following me, and they were traveling from the south into Walmart. A lot of people travel from the south into Walmart. So just because that car's behind you for 3 turns, they may be going to the same place. Now, if they're following your house, or you see them driving by your place repeatedly, call us. I mean, we're more than happy to look into it. But once again, that's generally not how victims are found. They're not abducted off the streets, they're lured in.
Right. And then they're conditioned.
Correct. They are usually broken psychologically at that point.
Mm-hmm.
They've been victimized so severely. Unfortunately, in my 25-year career in law enforcement, I've dealt with many investigations involving sex assault. And that victim was a victim once. By the time human trafficking victims get to us, it's been 1,000 times.
Mm-hmm.
And that level of trauma is just, it's almost incomprehensible of what they've been through.
Mm-hmm. Let's see here if we can grab some more
Comments, questions. Really appreciate everybody chiming in and being able to ask these questions in real time. And several of them are repeated. Really appreciate everybody sticking around and watching. Is there anything that I haven't asked that you would like the community to know or to understand, or
It's just important that and this is not unique by any means, this is back to 1850s, for Robert Peel, said the police are the community and the community are the police. And the police can't be successful in dealing with any community issue without the help of the community.
Mm-hmm.
And we are the community. I live in this area, my family's in this area. I want this to be a safe area.
you also have children. You also
Exactly.
They also have friends that
Yeah.
come over to your house and hang out.
We are just as involved in this as everybody else is.
Mhm.
So if you want the problem to be addressed, it takes the community. And to look at other issues in other communities where you may have violent crime, you'll see a disconnect, because the community doesn't cooperate with law enforcement. Nobody's getting the information, they're not cooperating, and then the problem's not solved, and it just gets bigger than bigger. We're fortunate in Effingham. We have a great community, and it's not because the police show up and do a good job. We do, but it's because the community won't put up with it.
Right.
They won't tolerate it. And as long as we have that, we'll be able to deal with the problems as they come up.
Yeah. It is a really fantastic community, and you see that in business and in social life and in things like that. I really think that as I learn more about human trafficking, as I speak to more people, it does boil down to the see something, say something.
Correct.
And to know that, you know, I think that we've been brought up into in a way of that's none of your business, you know, but it becomes the safety of our children, and it becomes the safety of our peers and the safety of our community members to say something.
That is a very real generational issue, because for so long, and in certain cultures in the community, domestic violence is tolerated, and it's a family issue. And
we don't talk about this outside the family.
Correct. And you know, why is so and so happy? Don't worry about it. Unfortunately,
I think that's translatable to not just to domestic violence, but to sexual abuse in a family too. That's just what happens in our family. We don't talk about it.
Correct. And in certain cultures and communities, that behavior is still ingrained, where they won't cooperate with law enforcement, or they don't think it's an issue. They think that's just the way something occurs. And if we are not informed of it and we don't have the cooperation, we have very little chance of succeeding in correcting the problem.
I think the takeaway that I hear from you and from talking is that open up the conversation. It's a really hard one to have, it feels like. It's really, you know, understanding the truths, being able to say, for instance, when my friend says, well, what about those people that go through, you know, the department store and they say, you know, somebody was following me, and then I can say, that's not how it looks. What we need to talk about. So it's having those conversational tools as a community member, as a parent, to be able to say, no, that's not actually accurate. And what you need to watch out for is
right. And like I said,
that new boyfriend your daughter has.
Right. And I have kids too, and I've had that conversation with them regarding, you know, online, where they're getting in contact with people that represent themselves to be so-and-so. It's like, no, don't ever give them your name. Don't ever give them your location or your address. And there's certain safety things, and that's easier to address. And then the next conversation may be, has anybody ever asked for your address? And then if the answer is yes, well, really, who is it? Where are they from? You know, what are they asking? And the conversation isn't you're accusing your child doing something wrong. It's just showing interest, and then see where that leads. But yeah, the parents actually being involved in their children's life is very important.
And this isn't necessarily just isolated to messaging or being online with somebody. This is in the gaming community, where, you know, the kids are attached and they can say, you know, oh, I'm just sitting over here in my house on Baker Street, or, you know, whatever.
Correct.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there's just so many platforms in which our children can communicate with others, that there's new apps coming out every day. So we have a very difficult time staying on top of it. The one thing we can stay on top of is the contact we have with our children and the communication we have with our children.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We went over what are some of the things we can look out for, and we'll save this video. It'll be accessible, so we can go back and, you know, play it again, share it again, so that you can see what we've talked about and identifying. There was a good question here. What is the best way to approach or inform community and agencies about human trafficking? When we talked about offering the training or the speaking, this group that we've created to be advocates through 5770 at Crossroads here, we want to be able to inform people of their options. This is just the beginning of you know, we started in you know, the pandemic hit, and we've not all been able to get together, and we've not all been able to hold a presentation. So we're looking at options in the way of webinars. We're looking at options in the way of what can we do in our community to present this information. And I think that there'll be more classes. Is there anything that you can speak directly to as far as, you know, where we're at now?
No, where we're at right now is having a great conversation online with a lot of people, and that's a good resource. So online is a great way, webinars are a great way, and God willing, hopefully soon we can actually get people in groups together, and that's what I would prefer because it makes it so much easier to have the connection with the community. And right now, people have questions, which is great, thank you for asking, but in groups, after it's done, is when I'm contacted by people because they want to have a conversation with me, and they want it to be confidential.
More private.
Right, and
Yes.
so that's my goal, that's how I prefer to have the contact with the community. This is great, and any information you can share is great,
Yeah.
but the personal contact, I think, is the best bang for the buck.
So do you mind if I leave how to contact you?
No, go right ahead. I'm Chief Jason McFarland with Effingham Police.
Okay.
The best way to contact me is by email.
Okay.
And it is just jmcfarland,
I'm putting this in for everybody.
very good,
Mm-hmm.
at effinghamil.com. And that email address is also on the city's webpage, so if you go to Effingham.il and look at Chief of Police, there's my email.
Okay.
So if there's a specific question, I'll be more than happy to answer it, or if there's something you want us to look at, I'll refer you to the officers who would actually be in charge of looking into that, because contrary to popular belief, I don't do a lot of police work anymore. It's mainly meetings, emails, and education, which is
Interviews
great.
like this.
Correct.
Yeah.
Which I love doing, but I really miss being a police officer too. So.
Sure. Well, I think that you probably will find that, and our hope is that, with these conversations and with talking about the real issues, the truths behind it, trying to clear up some of the muddiness, people will come out and say, I have been, hopefully there's one person. I mean, I don't hope that there's one person out there, but I hope if somebody is out there, they're seeing this and they're saying, I'm going to contact him tonight and talk to him about this neighbor that I have with their teenage daughter or my niece.
Yeah, please do. And that's how we generate a large portion of our investigations, and how we become aware of it is community contact.
Yeah.
Because other than actively looking at such as the internet, or if we absent that, we're left with just community resources of generating it.
Well, I really thank you. I'm going to take a look and see if there's any more questions that, we might have missed, but I feel like we've kind of covered the bases, and we'll be doing another one next Wednesday at 6:30. Let's check and see here. That's me. Oh, one really good comment. Do you think this pandemic and the hardships recently will cause an increase of these offenses?
One of the things we've seen, and I haven't seen the numbers personally, so don't quote me on this, but that when schools went to remote, once again, we talked about teachers and the specialized training they need, is they no longer had access to these students. And then when we went back into school, we saw our reports to the hotline go up dramatically. So the problem we're having is during the pandemic is these kids aren't going to school. They're sitting at home online on a large basis.
Right.
And once again, that's kind of the danger area. This is where they could become a victim, is online. And they also are cut off from the support they have of the adults and their peers at school.
And that engagement with their peers.
Correct.
They want to talk to somebody, and it doesn't necessarily matter who that person is.
Right. They're almost forced into an isolation role. And in my opinion, that's not really ideal for any child to be in.
Sure. That's a difficult one to say we have control over, in a sense, too. Really great question, Trish. This is great. Feel free to drop some more questions as as you view this on your own time. We will try to be responsive to the questions, and it'll also lead us to being able to inform you more. Your questions just give us direction and how we can better serve the community and serve survivors and be aware of victims. I really thank you for your time, and I thank everybody for watching. Any closing thoughts? See something, say something. I just keep going back to that.
It's the truth.
Yeah.
And once again, we're very fortunate to have the community we have, and it's because of the community we have that we can keep this. So we're always accessible. Call the police department 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You got me emails if you have some questions specifically, as you said, let me know, because the presentation I provide, I need feedback to know what I'm missing or what I'm still leaving on the table.
Sure.
So the questions are great. Just keep in mind there's some things I may not be able to discuss due to techniques and what we're doing investigatively, because we can't tip our hand as far as how we're succeeding on some of this. So.
Absolutely. I want to take deeper into some of these questions, but I know that
Correct.
you can't share that information.
Right.
Also, if you are an organization that would like to get a little bit more involved, or would like to have a little more training, or just have questions, feel free to also direct message or call the chamber. Really thank everybody for their time tonight, and we look forward to speaking with you again next Wednesday. Not you, but it'll be Patricia Trish McKnight, Butterfly Dreams Alliance co-founder or founder, and human trafficking survivor. So it'll be a good series of discussions, heavy but well needed in our community.
I've had an opportunity to meet Trish and see her presentation, and when we were done, I told her, I was like, I never met you, but I've been to your house 100 times as a cop.
Yeah.
And it really was an eye-opener as far as the opportunities that were probably missed by the community and by services to intercede. So she is just a wealth of knowledge, and it's a really touching story.
It is. She's a wealth of knowledge, and she's also a good resource for just anybody to understand what that's like. I mean, as a parent, and we talked about this, to understand your kid's friends, or to understand your neighbor, or to say, oh, that's something to look into.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
All right,
Thank you.
you.